Top Gun was incorporated in the beginning of September of 2020. The current ownership purchased the assets from South Central Cattle at that time. From 2020 to spring/summer of 22, they operated the current infrastructure as it was. And then in 22, they decommissioned most of the existing infrastructure that was at the home yard and started to build what we call today home lot. The current ownership is definitely the visionaries. John Y in Ontario, he's the back behind the barns. He's dealing with that on a daily basis out in the East Coast. John Lawton with us an extensive time in the industry, seen lots of different yards. Tim, he's been in the cow-calf game forever. He's got a lot of input on how the flow is going to go and things like that. We're feeding a little over 15,600 head as of today. We're about 85% full currently. For future planning, maybe expand this a little bit more. Time and economics will tell that one. If you come and actually put eyes on the facility, there's a lot of interesting aspects to it, how those cattle flow from the barns and up into the home yard, the way the home yard was designed. The double cowboy alley, we're able to not only check cattle or pull a pen, we're also able to bed and haul manure all at the same time without interference of the feed trucks. That long alley allows us to pull the furthest pen away from the process building all the way up with minimal interference to any other job that's happening out there. That is a really cool concept. We're able to do so many tasks at the same time without interfering. In home lot, or what we call home lot, there's a total of 24 RCC pens, 18 of them being larger pens that approximately hold 320 animals per pen. The remaining pens are a little smaller. We did this just so we had the opportunity to put smaller groups in if that's just the way the sort came out. Those pens hold approximately 150 animals each. Outside the barn area, there is now a total of 49 pens. They roughly hold 80 5-weight animals each. They support the flow through the barns. The original pen design was a windboard fence in mind. We put what we call a wobbly bar, top and bottom, to hold the windboard in place. Unfortunately, we found that the cattle like to eat those boards, so this fall of 24, we took out our windboard fence and we put in guardrail. It was a little extra cost, but it was going to cost us a lot to continue to replace that windboard. The RCC pens, they've all got that swale at the back of them. The cowboy alley sits higher than them just for drainage purposes. We do find that we have to go underneath the fences sometimes to allow for flow if we don't get enough water to move it along on its own path. All the pens in the home lot have a dirt mound in the middle that was never RCC'd. Reason being was they found on full RCC pens on big heavy cattle, the mound would, or the bed pack would slide along the RCC. John wanted to keep the heart of the bed pack stable, therefore leaving the dirt mound. A lot of what goes into planning RCC is in the early developmental stage, making sure your slope and your grade is proper, your base is prepped properly, and then the laying of the RCC is actually extremely fast. There's a lot of benefits to the RCC. It's easy to clean, minimal maintenance. If you do have a failure, generally it shows up pretty quick, probably within the first year, maybe 18 months. It has been a fairly simple process to fix those failures. About the only disadvantage to RCC is how slippery it can be. Due to that, we've had to sharpshoe the horses. Be extremely careful after cleaning that we don't rush a pen if we're going to pull it. We just kind of let them gradually go out on their own. I think the product coming off the RCC is a way cleaner product. You're not taking contaminants from the pen to your fields. You're not having to do that fill process to put dirt back in the pens. Typically we clean those pens 10 to 14 days intervals. We try and do spreading year round, especially in the wintertime, as long as snow doesn't get too deep or something. And then in the spring, once planting comes, then we'll probably start to stockpile some. So Home Lot is also equipped with 100% concrete loadout. Trucks back in at a lower level than the actual grade of the loadout itself. So those cattle don't have to go up a ramp. They never change level. We can have between 12 and 15 fat loads stacked up, ready to go when the trucks show up, just depending on what's going out at the time. The loadout itself is 100% concrete and designed in an S-alley shape. So once that leader goes, the cattle just flow through there so nicely, and they made it with a smooth wall, so there's nothing for them to get their foot hooked on to try and go out over the top. It really is something to see. It's too bad we're actually not shipping right now. Currently we have straight Holstein cattle, we have some beef cross cattle, and then straight beef, and as well as some feeder cows on the property. With the Holsteins, we're able to have a better source or a wider range of animals, going right from the baby calves at 300 pounds all the way up to 8-weight Holsteins if we want them. We primarily get 3 to 4 weight Holstein calves to go inside the barn, run through that process, and then as they hit 600 pounds, then they move up into the main yard. With them smaller calves, you know, they're a baby, they need to be TLC'd, and that was the big drive behind the barns, was to have that type of facility that created a niche where we could be able to pull those types of lighter cattle up. The original plan was to have 4 barns. 2 are currently constructed. The 2 calf barns are very unique to Top Gun. They both can house 550 animals. They're roughly 150 feet wide by 300 feet long. There's 12 pens inside them. They're pretty much the same build design as you would find in Eastern Canada and in those types of facilities out there. We've got doors on every pen to get to our outside pens. So we're currently standing in what we call Barn 1. These Holstein calves have been here 30 days. The idea with the barns is just to be able to give these calves a little better start. They can get out of the weather. Leaving the building kind of open allows that kind of climate to come inside the barn. It doesn't get hot. You got to remember, these cattle come out of barns that are 100% enclosed, acclimatized with fans and heat and whatever else. We're not doing that out here because eventually they got to go outside, and that's not existing here. Barn 1 and Barn 2 were started and finished the end of 2022 and the beginning of 2023. Barn 1 has a little space that's got our medical room in it, where Barn 2 is 100% penning. We did change the design a little bit in Barn 2 to have a little more access with equipment and such. We can actually drive straight through Barn 2, through our gutters, through our bed packs, and go right through the barn. Where Barn 1 we have a dead wall. The barns are also both equipped with turkey nets, so in the summertime we keep them open along with our doors to help with airflow. Feeding wise, we've split it, so every 3 pens is 1 drop of feed. Just that way we can monitor intakes a little bit better, rather than saying the whole side of the barn is 1 drop. With the little babies, they start on quite a bit higher forage-based diet. We're also feeding Cellmax, which is just kind of a yeast to help with their ruminant function inside the facility. So after 45 days, these cattle will come out of the barn, and then they'll go into the outside pens where we have availability, but in the wintertime, we're generally putting these cattle now on the south side of the barn so they get more exposure to the sun and they get protection from our northwest winds. The nice part about doing it this way is when we get into the rhythm of rotating those barns every 45 days, we have things get stacked up outside so that when it's time for them to go up, we basically clean 6 pens outside. They go up, it opens a hole for the next barn to come out. I think the advantage for us is having the ability with the barns to buy so many different class types and weight types of cattle. We're not locked into one stream. We can look at multiple ways to have cattle on feed and to generate revenue. The barns in the barn area in particular, they're very labor intensive. Like those pens are walked through probably twice a day. We want to make sure we're on top of those cattle all the time. The Holsteins and the cross cattle, because they've been so heavily handled by humans, it makes it a little bit more challenging to pen check, to move, to do anything with, because they always want to be in close proximity, where a beef animal that's been out on the grass, they're used to their own space and they want to keep it that way. The difference between the dairy versus the beef is mostly the size. So when they come in and they're that 300, 400 pound range, those animals generally receive an extra implant than we would see typically if they came in at 600, 700 pounds. Every class of cattle has its own unique challenges. So all those cattle are treated as high risk cattle. Our other larger cattle coming in are treated also mostly as high risk, some medium risk. Most of the beef cattle we get here are assembled through the buy station, so they're treated as high risk as well, because they're coming from multiple auction yards. Our health protocols, not only do we deal with, but we're in direct contact with TELUS out of Coaldale in developing these types of protocols for the different weight classes and types of cattle that we put on feed here. The beef on dairy versus the straight Holstein move through the system pretty much the same way. About the only difference that kind of comes to mind is that we probably do a little less sorting on the beef on dairy as they move up versus the straight Holsteins. We generally do quite a bit more sorting on the Holsteins, just size them up as we get into the bigger pens to go all the way through. I think the biggest thing when it comes to the various classes of cattle that we have on feed here is just stacking them up so that when it comes to the kind of the big picture of when they're going to go out and how they're going to go out, that we get those types of animals or those classes of cattle fairly close in proximity to one another. It helps with time management of our feeding. It helps with how we move them to the final stages before they go on the trucks to go to the plant. Our allocation or heads per pen is based on our bunk space. So we try and operate at about 7 inches of bunk space per animal. Currently in all of our rations, we have rolled tempered barley, rolled tempered oats. We got wet and dry distillers, flax meal inside the baby calf ration, screenings, whole oats, silage, and ground hay. Above the mill, we have two 70-ton metric ton bins that we dump our grain into, and as we're doing that, we're adding hot water to it. Hot water makes the whole process go faster. It roughly stays in those bins for about 6 hours before we roll it. What the tempering process does when you run the grain through the mill, you're not having the fines that you would have under a normal dry roll. Because the grain has soaked up some of that moisture that you added in, then it just kind of presses the kernel rather than breaks it apart. Our rations, doesn't matter what class or type of cattle they are, we have set rations, and and all the cattle will see them depending on how big they come in. About the only thing we've been doing with the Holsteins is we've been trying to get them up on a warmer ration sooner than we would probably a straight beef. The dairy is geared for that hotter ration. They're used to being on that kind of feed, so we try and get them up on feed sooner than we would a normal beef animal. We are a restricted yard because we're bringing in U.S. origin-based cattle. The big thing with restriction is all the things you have to do with CFIA. They've been really good to work with. They've helped us along quite a bit. The big thing with being restricted is there's only 2 destinations for the animal. Either they're going to the plant or we can move them as feeder cattle to another restricted yard. But with being restricted, we have to be able to know where that animal is any day of the week. In case CFIA shows up, they can ask us, where's XYZ, and we gotta go be able to take them there. The nice part about being so close to town is that we are involved in the affluent irrigation project between the city and local irrigation sector. We get gray water from the city to water our 4 pivots. It's roughly 560 acres under pivot. And the original project was designed by the city and they put up all the money for everything. Since then, my understanding is that the group has purchased some of the infrastructure. So the city's slowly having the group take over the project. It's a mutual benefit for the patrons as well as for the city. They don't have to treat that water to do something with it. We can put it on the land, we can get benefit out of it. We're located about 8 miles south of Moose Jaw. Great to be so close to town. I would say probably 90% of our labor force lives in Moose Jaw itself. And that seems to be something that the workers are really concerned about these days, is their housing and their cost to get to and from work. Most of the workers, because they're local, if they like cattle, they're not going to find much better place to go than here. With the LMIA workers, those guys sign a 2-year contract to go through that program. So unless something doesn't work out, we know they're here for 2 years. Both Johns and Tim have been incredibly helpful in how this thing is going to work. The vision's been very clear. They are very open book as to any questions or issues that arise. No, really cool group of guys to work with.